So, good evening, everyone. I'm Hannah. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Blue Hill Library. And I just wanted to say a quick welcome tonight to our virtual event, and thanks to you all for making the time in your busy Zoom schedules to join us. We are very excited tonight to have Deborah Cummins back at the library. She's read here before, and we're so excited that she's going to share from her new book, Until They Catch Fire, and maybe some other things as well. Deborah splits her time between Portland and our own Deer Isle, and she's the author of several poetry collections as well as a collection of personal essays. Her work's been featured all over the place in magazines and radio shows, and she's a library favorite. So please join me in silently welcoming Deborah, and I will pass it over to her. And take it away, Deborah.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. I assume you can all hear me okay? Right? Okay, thanks, Hannah. So I want to thank Hannah, the library, Blue Hill Books, Jeff Hayes at Deerbrook, my publisher, for doing such a great job with pulling my book together, and to all of you for joining in this evening. I truly appreciate you taking the time. So I'm glad we have that waiting room thing, because this seems a little less strange now. I participated in all kinds of Zoom meetings, and I've attended other author events, but having myself read and see myself doing it is a little odd. So, but I welcome the opportunity, and I'll do the best I can. So my new book, Until They Catch Fire, it's my first poetry collection in a number of years.
Can I interrupt you just a second? Your audio, at least for me, is a little clippy. I don't know if anyone else is having that issue. I'm seeing some nods. If you want to maybe try just like mute yourself and then unmute to see if that fixes it. It wasn't doing it before, but of course, now that it's go time, it was just cutting in and out a little bit.
How about now?
That seems better to me.
Does it? Because I've got this.
Yeah, it's better, Deborah. It's better. It's much better than it was.
I think you're good.
Okay. All right. Well, by all means, let me know, because I'm trying to use this webcam, which has supposedly a good microphone to it. So we'll have to see. So please let me know. I hope it works. Anyway, as I was saying, Until They Catch Fire visits some of the same terrains as my previous books, but in a more personal way. At its heart is the death of my 45-year-old brother, and 10 years later, that of my mother. This in many ways represents my personal journey through grief, acceptance, and belief.
I think it is doing it again, unfortunately, Deborah. I don't know. It's like as soon as you start talking seriously, it just started clipping a little bit.
Now you can't see me. So let's see. It's
see me. Okay. Now you can see me?
Yep.
Can you hear me better?
Right now it's good, so forge ahead and let's see. I'll interrupt you again if it messes up.
My husband and I practiced this last night and it worked like a charm, so we'll see. So anyway, this in many ways represents my personal journey through grief. And while it is personal, I'm hoping that it speaks to you and to readers who will find themselves in some of my experiences within these poems. Of course, along with grief, there is joy. The embrace of life as we once knew it, and the life we've yet to live. A reflection on the past and what is to come. I'd like to think that this is especially timely right now as we struggle over loss in many forms, but also embrace the gifts of love and caring and of the everyday, which certainly we are coming to appreciate even more during these uncertain times of unfamiliar isolation. So tonight, I am going to read about a dozen poems. I'm going to make comments along the way, and that should leave us time for Q&A after. My first poem, Everything Has a Heart, was on Stu Kessenbaum's Poems from Here, Maine Public Radio weekly feature every week. I know a lot of you in Maine are familiar with that, and I've been honored to have some of my poems included. When this poem first came out with Stu's column, From Here, Poems from Here, I think it was in June, and a lot of people said, oh wow, what a timely poem for now. In fact, this poem is one of the oldest poems in my collection, and it was started in the weeks after, probably the month after, the 9/11 tragedy that hit our country, which of course the anniversary is tomorrow. I started this poem then, I abandoned it, came back to it periodically, and finally felt like the poem had gotten to where I wanted it to be. So I think I'll start with this poem. Everything has a heart. This bulb's hidden tulip with its single throb of color, wild plums spilling a windfall of crimson fruit, a crow oddly quiet, ruffling its iridescence from a branch of the oak itself, its gash where a woody knot boils out. In my garden, leaning into my shovel, trusting in rain, roots, and time, I remind myself everything has a heart. Even God, I'm told, who holds the match to a new season's light, ratchets up the wind as though it carries unfinished dreams, untold stories. And who, I'm to believe, is directing the wild geese and their familiar ruckus as they ride across the sky in a broken line, turning south, east, south again, their only intention to catch a good thermal, to sing hard, high above the earth. This next poem appeared just last Sunday in the Maine Sunday Telegram's Deep Water column, weekly column, and it was a surprise to me. I knew that Megan Grumling, who curates that collection, had chosen this poem some months ago, but I didn't know when it was going to appear. So late Sunday night, as I was reading my digital subscription to the paper, lo and behold, there was my poem. So that was a lovely surprise. This poem centers on the Garden of Eden, which to me has fascinated me, not because I have a big belief in its actually happening, but rather as a story. And it's a story in which I've always felt that Eve got a pretty bad rap. So this is my different take and a different way of looking at that story and what happened and what followed. So it happens. Never a child, Eve woke one day, a grown woman, beside a strange man, in a land yet not yet fully named. No name yet for summer rain, shadows among the clamoring leaves, the plunge of bees purposeful in the lilies. No knowledge of why flowers open their morning colors to morning, or a heron lifts suddenly from the shallows. Not yet a need to tilt her head back to an iron sky just to feel snow licking her face. Nor with unfamiliar restlessness to retreat beneath a tree that never yellows and have a good cry. But let's say she did. And there beneath the tree is where she was found, where desire wasn't yet a word, but was known by her body, a hunger unsated, in spite of all that abounded, was within easy reach. As was, so it happens, the apple, the hiss in her ear. And let's say she knew exactly what she was doing. Not falling from, but into. Not succumbing, but choosing. And now with the knowledge to know the difference. Like most writers, I like to play with words. I like to play with the sound of them, their different meanings, whether the same word can be a noun or a verb. In my next poem, the word I decided to do this, to use, was the word fall. I guess it's probably good to use, to have this poem regarding fall follow the previous one. But anyway, this poem is titled, So Many Ways to Fall. The way I fell in love with my husband, or years before had fallen away from the Catholic Church, and so was told I'd fallen from grace. How easy to fall for a plate of pommes frites sprinkled with sea salt, or for sunsets over the bay and distant Camden Hills. Probably countless all the ways to fall short, to fall out of touch, to allow a relationship to fall apart, let it fall through the cracks, the way words too often fall on deaf ears. Fall away, fall from, fall into depression or addiction. So many times I've pictured my mother falling out of bed the night her stroke announced itself and life as she'd known it fell away. But not once have I been able to change it, put her back in bed, take away that fall, as if there was a way to fall back, fall so close to fail. I'm often asked where a poem comes from, and often I can't really answer that question. It's kind of a mystery to me, even after all these years. But I can say that the origin of this poem came from a phrase that one morning, I almost seem to have woken up with it. I don't know why. But the phrase was, if a house had eyes. I was kind of puzzled by it. And later that morning, a second part of that sentence kind of popped into my head. And so they formed the first two lines of this poem that is titled, If a House Had Eyes. If a house had eyes, it would then want hands to hoist the blinds, pry loose the fingers of grief, lead, drag, if it must, a woman from her bed to witness another autumn spectacle, fallen leaves clamoring in a bright breeze, how the world insists on rearranging itself. The house needs no ears to know she is crying. And why need a mouth? Better to hold back any refrain. Better a wordless silence reigns with objects left behind and the certainty the dead won't be returning to claim them. Enough's already been said. In the shuddering house's expanding joints, its creaks and moans, rattles and thrum. In a midnight struggle against the pummel of a storm itching for a fight, the battle the house can win. But in its heart, of course, a house has one. It knows when it must relent. There's nothing it can do. No locks to check, latches to secure, to keep out illness, disease, or death. This next poem has an epigraph. It references that there are quotes in the poem, a few brief quotes from W.H. Auden's famous poem, Musée des Beaux-Arts, which is a poem referencing Bruegel's famous painting, Icarus. And I think most of us recall the myth of Icarus, who with his father fastened on some wings and tried to fly. But despite the warnings, the boy flew too close to the sun. The wax melted, he fell from the sky and plunged into the sea, as depicted in Bruegel's painting. On the morning of, no cracks erupted in the bedrock, no boulders on the shore heaved. The birds did not abandon the trees. Offshore, Hart Island still welcomed the rising sun's golden coronation of its uppermost spruce tops, the clouds still willingly tinged pink. Out on the bay, I saw no sign that Icarus had plunged into the sea. A pair of lobster boats chugging toward deeper water were as oblivious as Auden's expensive, delicate ship, that despite something amazing, a boy falling from the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. All going on in the same moments, my brother's body in the crematory chamber was being burned up. That 6-foot body propelling him, child to man, for 45 years. His evanescent and combustible body, not just of bones and blood, but home I was to believe to something already released, returned to the world, its sparks of energy. I could only picture spiraling smoke. Icarus fell from the sky, plunged into the sea. His white legs disappeared beneath the waves, yet the planet spun, the plowman turned away, the ship sailed on. As my brother's body was wheeled into the flames, boats on the bay had somewhere to get to, and the sun, never failing to set its alarm, kept its morning appointment with another new day, intent on declaring it had been robbed of nothing. For each of us, a journey through grief is singular and personal. But probably most of us in the process experience a lot of conflicting emotions and reactions in our struggle. I guess in this poem, here are some of mine. It's titled A Griever's Reference Manual. Prepare pancakes. Forget to flip them until they're scorched discs. Eat when you have no appetite. Compose emails that are never sent. Realize with the open book on your lap, you've read the same paragraph 3 times and can't remember a single word. Kick the shovel that refuses to stay propped in the garden shed. Fling a pot lid to the floor when it won't fit back into the drawer. When your printer jams, at last allow your husband to step in, save it from imminent destruction. At your desk, a blank page. At the mirror, oddly, you still look normal. Wonder why the phone doesn't ring. Hate it when the phone rings. Reject euphemisms, a lexicon of laid to rest and at peace, trying to make death more palatable. Discover the almost infinite ways to play if only. Admit that if only in the if only game, there weren't so many occasions to use better and harder, especially in conjunction with the verb try. Vow never to tell anyone time will heal or life goes on. Above all, reject the simplicity of metaphors, a flame, a wall, the sea. There is nothing to keep alight, climb, swim through to get to the other side. So this next poem came about because it was a promise to one of our grandsons, Jimmy. And it actually got its origin right here, right there. I'm in Deer Isle at the moment, right there in Blue Hill, the summer before last, in Thurston, in the restaurant over dinner. Bob and I were there, my husband Bob and I were there with our grandson Jimmy and also our grandson Daniel. And I want to pause here to say, and a lot of you grandparents out there probably recognize this too, that it's amazing to me how these grandchildren, these wee little grandchildren, grow up and become these amazing young adults with such engaging, intelligent, far-ranging conversations. And it's just a joy and delight to be around them for so many reasons. And on this particular night, somehow our far-ranging conversation had wound around to faith and belief and the role of chance and contingency in our lives. And at some point I said, maybe it's simpler to be an atheist. To which Jimmy said, Grandma, I think you need to write a poem about that. So I did, I tried. And probably this poem belongs in my I struggle with my belief category. So here is my poem titled, To Be an Atheist. Would things be simpler without any need to remember dates on the calendar that commemorate which saints were shot full with arrows, fed to the lions, roasted alive over coals? No need to be reminded we entered this world with original sin, a blighted soul. Forgetting the words necessary for a psalm, prayer, or hymn would be okay, the requirements to kneel fewer. But perhaps too, there'd be less of an easy fallback to, please forgive. Surely something akin to God's breath would still reside in every serrated leaf and the throats of spring peepers in the hollows, wouldn't it? Certainly, there'd be no less recognition that our species is deeply imperfect. And we'd still need to speak out against cruelty and injustice, although about what it would not be ordained. Probably in whatever is unpleasant, frightening, or fatal, we'd have to replace God's got a plan for us with a stronger acceptance of contingency, chance. But what in the end is the substitute? With what or whom do we bargain? In our grief, to what or whom do we turn our faces to the sky and shake our fists? And when we cry out, why, would the lack of a reply be even more thunderously silent? Sorry for this tickle. So in my next poem, I want to journey back in time, as in several decades, to my early teenage years. So as I said, decades. And some of you of a certain age will recognize certain references here, some won't. And this takes place in the small backyard of our our very modest South Suburban Chicago home that my family moved to from a 2-flat apartment on the south side of Chicago when I was 7. And I treasured that little yard, and I treasured a particular crabapple tree in the corner of it. where I had a very rudimentary, what I'd call it, well, I called a treehouse, but it was kind of like a platform among the branches up above. This poem is titled In the Treehouse. Before the coveted August issues of 17, before the transistor radio I pressed to my ear while the whole house slept, before Dylan introduced the tambourine man and Scott Davis in a souped up Chevy became the first bad and oh so beautiful boy I surrendered to. I loved our backyard's crabapple tree, its shadowy coolness, the hushed expectancy of twig and leaf, and how, high among its branches, the world of unwashed dishes and drooling babies went on without me. I loved the afternoons of hard, sudden rain, how lightning can hit without warning. In the treehouse, I didn't practice being alone, considering the possibilities of silence. Nor was I fearful of what already might be behind me. This was before entrances to sweep, rooms to clean, before wishing, if briefly, for another kind of life completely, before giving names to shapeless, futile aches, longing, anticipatory grief. One day, I must have climbed down and never gone back. Simple as that. In this next poem, I'm going to journey back in time, but not very far, and also elsewhere. This poem takes place in Rome. And over a number of years, I had the great good fortune to be able to spend a fair amount of time in Rome. I was there, my husband and I were there. We rented an apartment there on a few occasions. I was also there solo. I did an visiting artist residency there. We had friends that lived there. And so it was we had several occasions to be back there, and it became very familiar. And like I said, I was there with and without my husband, and this, but with Bob, and this touches on two such occasions. And it's titled, On an Encore Trip to Rome. But this time in Santa Maria, I'm pulled to the life-size statue at the rear of the nave. Saint Anthony, clad in his brown robe, the saint believed to grant wishes, answer prayers, slips of paper petitions piled at his feet, heaped in his outstretched arms. The year before, I could have written my own entreaty, please heal my brother. Now, months after his death, a second chance. If only I'd known better how to love. More sought absolution than a request. I scribble instead, please take care of my family. Drop it in with the rest. As though caught in a subversive act, I duck my head, step away, wait for my husband in the portico. Outside, there's a persistent December rain, the wind with a colder bite. Hand in hand, we hurry across the piazza. Here, on a warm spring morning the year before, I sat alone among strangers, sipping a cappuccino, a solo traveler so seemingly sure of herself. In my open journal, I indulged in musing about what my life would be like if my husband died before me. Nothing smug in what I now know to be true. There is no practice. Nothing prepares you, gives you a head start on grief. Beyond the piazza, we pass through the tiny Callisto arch to a favorite restaurant. Its wood paneled room, a fire burning warm and bright, our celebration of a Roman pasta dish we'd yet to duplicate at home. Cacio e pepe. so simple and perfect, just 3 ingredients, enough, more than enough. This poem appeared sometime in the last year. It was also in Poems from Here, the Maine Public Poetry weekly reading that Stu does. It's all those poems are also wonderfully archived through Maine Public. It's written for my husband, Bob, titled Trying to Tell Us. Little by little, my love, the signs accrue. Our muscles forget their grace in the easiest maneuver. We swim half as far out as strength once enabled. More breathlessness climbing Russ's Hill. For those of us discovering late who and what we love, there is no reprieve from how the body betrays us, or how the mind comprehends that it all begins with the body. Hands, eyes, belly, lips that kiss, tongue that tells. Already, somewhere, paths seem mapped out for us. But isn't the going fragrant, sweet? Unaware of age, our blood still hums. Remember, love, how once we stayed out in the cold, skating the slick, frozen river until frostbite numbed our fingers and toes. And after the red ache of warming, our bodies trying to tell us we're dying, we're still alive. At the time of my brother's death, my mother was in the hospital after having heart surgery. Eventually, she went to ICU and then skilled nursing and eventually long-term care. All these things always seemed to happen in summer when I was up here on an island in Maine, and my folks lived, and as did my brother and his family, lived in Arizona. But I made frequent trips to Arizona, and as the eldest of my family, I found myself in positions of a lot of responsibility, especially on behalf of my dad. And perhaps some of you will recognize yourselves in this role within your own family and happenings within your own families and situations. This poem is titled The New Order of Things. I'd become too easily convinced that to hug my mother risked some tube or catheter detaching, or that too frail she'd break. Never a family of big hugs or enfolding embraces, she'd long nurtured the belief that we were. Hard to remember a time, though surely there had to be one, when I was gathered to her, held, my face pressed against scratchy fabric or damp apron, and eyes shut, I nestled into that sudden warmth. A gesture I want suddenly to reciprocate, after her nurse, ascribing it to bad dreams, says, your mother calls out in the night. With, I imagine, vivid, recurrent images of what in words she still refused to articulate. Or perhaps she woke into a fog without a bell buoy to offer direction through a narrow passage, worn whether she was coming ashore or drifting out to sea. My mother, who'd lived through the death of her first newborn, now being asked to survive the loss of her son. While I, attending, no longer feel like my mother's child. In the new order of things, I could not be the child needing succor or guidance. I was older than my brother would ever be. Something new was now expected of me. the comforter, the one to steer through fog, the one to turn on the nightlight and beat back the dark. But am I even tall enough to reach the switch? So just a few more. My guess is most of us wish to be with our loved ones in their final moments in life. And we may even anticipate and imagine it happening that way. But sadly, often it seems, though we try, it doesn't happen that way. And so it is in this poem titled Departed. I missed it by an hour, the moment my mother slipped from is to isn't. I was witness only to the body that had held her dreams, secrets, and imaginings, had once held me. And now, dare I say it, was a vessel. Her skull so prominent against flesh, it looked like her cheekbones threatened to escape, but her mouth only slightly agape, uncontorted, without grimace. Evidence I needed of no struggle, her body done, yielding. She'd have been grateful for at last her room's quiet. No special bed pump wheezed, no oxygen machines gurgled. Gone the catheter, pick lined the elastic cuff, holding in place all her needles and tubes. Would she have been aware in her last hours of final human touch kindnesses? How someone had rubbed her favorite lavender lotion onto her splotched hands, covered her with the blue quilt gifted by hospice. Where, though, was the pervasive spirit, an essence almost holy, I'd long been told succeeds us? Only an irrefutable, overwhelming absence. She'd not merely left her room. She'd not, an insult of simplicity, passed. Nor, in my eyes, was she the departed. As if she'd embarked on a journey and our only task to see her off, say goodbye, be certain someone on shore waves, flings kisses as the anchor is heaved, and we usher ourselves back into the living, to lament, keen, and begin, or perhaps continue, to regret. All those months, I never asked her if she was scared. I was afraid to. In the aftermath of my young brother's death, and then, of course, my mother's, it was impossible for me to imagine the weight of the burden of my father's grief, the loss of his youngest child, as well as his wife of 60 years. I spent a fair amount of time with him, well, a lot of time really, in Arizona, particularly following my mother's death. And it was so difficult to watch this strong man of a certain generation hold things in. My father of so much action and project making. It was both sad, heartbreaking, and also frustrating to watch him be disengaged for a long period after. This poem started out with a question. I remember shouting to him out in the yard one day. I was trying to fix something in their house, and I asked, "Where's your hammer, Dad?" And then that became the title of the following poem that I wrote in the aftermath. Where's your hammer, Dad? Your electric sander. That saber saw we couldn't drag you from, those weeks you naughty pine paneled the basement. Rigged above your new wet bar, the revolving Schlitz sign scavenged from old Pat and Matt's. Sit and stare into space. You're not the type. Where's your level, your lathe? Remember that winter you overhauled that busted Evinrude outboard and restored Mom's maple hutch, its door that for months wouldn't stay shut? How about that long afternoon you wouldn't abandon your workbench until you'd finished your surprise, the Burl display case for my horse figurines, a collection I was so sure then I couldn't live without? Come, at least kick back in your retrofitted lounger. Let's grab a cold suds, Pappy's still punching homers. Sit and stare, eyes that don't dream, plan a next project. Look, there's still plenty of wood, wire, and bolts begging for connection, drill bits eager to bite. Where's your screwdriver, Dad? Your needle nose pliers, your Allen wrench, acetylene welder. For God's sake, doesn't something need to be fixed? And finally, I'm going to end with this poem. So much, we are grounded by so much here on earth. And yet, regardless our beliefs, I think we often find solace and maybe even answers looking towards the sky. And perhaps that poem resonates with that a little bit. The name of the poem is The Dead. When we begin to slip their pictures from our wallets, haul their box letters to the attic, the dead enlist the wind to rattle windows, the rain to speak over and over their names. Inside, they lie down on our narrow beds and touch our bodies. They want us to show them how we know they are still with us, to point past dust on the glass to the frothed collapse of a flowering crabapple, or the last light a hemlock cradles in a branch until darkness unplants color. If only we'll demonstrate how an old song still shakes us, or a single misaddressed envelope. Sometimes the dead signal from a hillside's bending grass. In the zodiac sky, they flash their bright mirrors, and some nights appear closer, as though between us the distance has narrowed. So thank you very much. And I think,
Thank you, Deborah.
so thank you. And Hannah, I think you're gonna open it up if there's any Q&A now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just remind folks, we are recording this to post later. So if you're shy about being on camera, you're welcome to keep your cameras off and either unmute yourself and speak up or type something in the chat and I can repeat it. But I think we can go ahead and just have anyone who'd like to ask a question or share a thought, unmute yourself and speak up.
Hannah, may I
Go
start?
for it, Marge.
It was just such a strange coincidence, Deborah. When you started reading Everything Has a Heart, you got towards the end, and we have very large flocks of Canada geese that live in Allen Cove sometimes, but they fly over every day on their way to the islands to feed. And a flock of about, I'd have to say 50 or so, was flying over honking just as you read the end of that poem. Would you read that line again about the geese flying?
Sure. Let me see.
Everything has a heart.
Yeah. Well, I talk about everything has a heart. I'll start because it's a long sentence and I'll just start with all those lines. Even God, I'm told, who holds the match to a new season's light, ratchets up the wind as though it carries unfinished dreams, untold stories, and who I'm to believe is directing the wild geese in their familiar ruckus as they ride across the sky in a broken line, turning south, east, south again, their only intention to catch a good thermal, to sing hard, high above the earth.
That was it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I just want to thank you for reading that poem about your father, which has been in my head and now in view of me in your book since we read together last year at the Blue Hill Library. I just think that's sensational. It just makes me cry every time. So thank you.
You're welcome, Emily. I think of you whenever I read that poem, you know.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Deborah, do it.
Deborah, as you well know, I'm a finance person and not an English person or a poet at all. But I know that you revise poems, and I know because I saw something recently that you had changed a poem that maybe was on, in the main paper last week. So I'm curious about whether you let poems sit for a long time and then you change them, or whether they have a lifespan and you're like, okay, it's 3 years old, I'm not gonna change a bit of it. So so forgive me for asking the question.
Oh no, I mean
know.
that's a really good poem. I mean, a really good comment, and other writers ask it, so I mean, it's not like, and we're all different, but the poem I think you're referencing, Deb, is the one that just appeared last Sunday, and
Right.
it appeared, the title was More. In the collection, it's actually the first poem in the collection, and it's titled So It Happens. I had written that poem before. I had submitted it as More. I put it in the manuscript originally as More, and then looking at it again, working on it a little bit, and you're always tinkering. I changed the first line, and I changed the title, and then I changed a few things later on, and it became then even how it looks on the page is different. It's now in triplets, which obviously won't mean anything to you, but they're 3-line stanzas.
No, I at least know what that means.
Yeah, okay. And so, but the poem itself does not change more. I felt there was a clearer and more immediate way to get into the poem. So I just felt like there was a better way to get into the poem, and I like the So It Happens later. It echoes later. So as far as other poems, the first poem I read tonight, Everything Has a Heart, is I said I started that poem. It was in I want to say in October, and Bob and I were still living in Evanston, Illinois, outside Chicago part of the year. I started that poem. I thought about it, and I started not long after I was bearing tulip bulbs, spring flowering bulbs you should do in fall. And I started it, and I got a certain way into it, and then I left it alone, and I went back to it, back and forth, back and forth. I think it was trying to do so much, and then ultimately it got to where it is now. But that was over a number of years. It wasn't like it was sitting on my desk every day working on it. It goes in a folder, and then I kind of get it out and I play with it. But I have to say, even in preparing, so are you ever done with tinkering? Probably not, because there's a couple of poems I read tonight, for example, that when I was looking at them, and I actually read them aloud to see how long they would take, because I didn't want it to go on too long, I actually changed a few words and penciled them in differently. So even as recently as yesterday, I was tinkering and changing things a little bit. So it's kind of an ongoing process. I mean, and I'm sure there are other examples like that in the book.
Thanks.
So, thanks for the question.
Hi, Deborah.
Who is that? Oh, Melinda, hi.
Linda.
And I'm here with Liz and Ginger, and we've been really enjoying this. It's great to see
So
you.
you are in Blue Hill. You're back from Friends?
I'm here for, yeah.
Good.
And glad to be able to listen in tonight. And
Oh, good.
it would be more congenial if we were all at the library together. But
Absolutely. Tell me about it. I would be able to be having wine with you guys.
yeah, here, cheers. Anyway, I particularly am interested in the poem about Icarus. And
Yes.
this is a painting and a poem that I've studied quite a bit. And it's interesting the way you made it your own. I mean,
Thank you.
did use a lot of the same sentiments that were in the original poem, but I just would like it if you would talk a little bit about how you were able to take that well-known poem and turn it around and make it your own.
Well, this is the case where, I mean, the poem itself is based on an actual occurrence, which was that morning. As so often happens, I think, like when you think back to 9/11, for example, remember how gorgeous that day was, one of those blue and gold days in September. And of course, sometimes in our moments of deep loss after some tragedy happens to us, you almost resent how beautiful the weather is. And I remember the morning that I knew my brother was going to be cremated. I was here in Deer Isle. I was flying to Arizona, I think, the next day. And I looked out at the bay and it was just such a gorgeous day. And I saw the lobster boats. I didn't quite know how to do that poem. But then I started thinking about Auden's poem, which is based on that painting.
Yeah.
And so I went back to Auden's poem and looked at it. And I decided, rather than make it totally personal, just about what I saw on the bay, was to layer in that poem in a way. And some of those, I think there's like 3 short phrases that I've gotten quotation marks in the poem, but it seemed like it layered it in a more interesting way to me. And because that's how I felt. It's like, how dare the world go on about its business, and how dare it be beautiful, and how dare those people going on when this catastrophic thing is happening. And I think that's where at least that's where my, feeling.
I thought it was beautiful because it evokes the poem and the painting and your own personal thing, all in layers and all at once. And I really thought it was wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you. That was my intent, so I'm glad.
Well, you achieved your intent.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if you can see the chat, Deborah, but some folks have been just putting in some comments. Molly said, beautiful, thank you.
Oh, good.
Candace says, loved hearing you read your gorgeous poems, thank you. Philip said, Deborah, thank you for a wonderful reading. And Jean and David said, thank you for weaving the evening so beautifully together for us.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it very much. Taking the time to be here tonight.
I have a question. First of all, thank you for putting into words so many feelings that are hard to express. And my question is, how do you come at such a life-changing moment or experience? You can't come at it you don't come at it directly, or you'd probably become mute yourself. So my question, I guess, is my response to this experience. You allowed us to come at it at an angle. Let's see, come at death from an angle. Like the whole poem was not focused directly on, say, your mother's falling out of the bed or the empty house, but you weave it in with other images that allow us time to breathe while you're expressing the overall. And I wonder, how do you do that? Say in one poem, you start with a phrase, or do you start with what you want to say at the end and then decide how to set that into the delivery?
Well, Marie, it happens so many different ways. I can't say there's one particular way. I often jot things in a journal. I don't have what I call a daily diary where I wrote this happened, this happened, this happened. It's more just jottings or something I read that triggers. I mean, I always have my little notebook and my pencil, whatever I'm reading nearby. So some of it comes from that. I also do try to be mindful of how to get to a personal experience that allows the reader in. And that might be through images, it might be a different circumstance. Some of the poems in this collection I'd like to think are not specifically about a specific death or incident, but it gets around that subject and the idea of grief and loss and what we do have in the face of potential loss. And so I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but it's different ways. And of course, it takes a lot of revision and a lot of pulling out the inessential, and just trying to make it as succinct as possible, but hoping that, you know, there's that make the specific made universal, because while you all may feel sympathy for what I went through, I want more than that. What I want is to reach other people in terms of perhaps you've experienced this, or maybe this helps you understand. And that's what I'm really kind of aiming for. It's not really what I'm thinking about really specifically when I'm writing it, but it's what I'm aiming for. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, yes, well done. I mean, so many times you circled around to something that I could interpret in my, of course, in my own way. You want your audience to be able to do that. So thank you.
Well,
Yes.
for example, in the poem, So Many Ways to Fall, I had all these things going, and then I love when I surprise myself. Robert Frost said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. When I got to the line where I say, so many ways I've imagined my mother falling, I can't remember exactly, falling out of bed, I didn't expect that to happen. The poem took a definite turn at that point. And so that was a surprise to me. It's just like in the writing and going through it. And sometimes you can trick your brain, or your brain tricks itself. I had so much fun in a way thinking about all the falls and you know, whether it's noun or verb, and then all of a sudden, bam, that line came. So that happens sometimes too. And then the poem takes off in a different direction.
And one of my favorite last lines that you read tonight was, "It's as simple as that," when you came out of the treehouse. That's on the other. For me, it was on the other spectrum. Yeah, it is as simple as that, isn't it?
There's no explanation. It just happens.
No. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Marie. Appreciate it.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments they want to share? Deborah, I know you said you have some things coming up. Do you want to share anything coming up with you?
Well, I've got, and Marie knows more than I do about the wonderful word, the Blue Hill Lit Fest, coming up in late October. And God bless you all, even though we can't get together, you're all pursuing it online over longer days, more days. And I will be reading one of what would normally have been the poetry crawl, which is a wonderful event that moves through different venues in the city, in the town. There will be 4 of us reading, and I'll be one of the poets reading on that on Sunday afternoon. And if you go to their website, they're starting to update what's happening when. So that will all be online. And then in late October, Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, along with Longfellow Books, is co-hosting a reading that I'll be doing along with a conversation with Stu Kessenbaum. That'll be my Portland book launch, and that will be on October 27th, I think it is. I think they just agreed to that date. So I'll be doing that then too. So, and hopefully in the not too distant future, I can do more readings where I can actually be with people. But this has been pretty darn nice in lieu of being able to be together.
Yeah, and that website for the literary festival is wordfestival.org if anyone's interested in checking that
Okay,
out.
great. Thank
And
you.
I'll just remind everyone you can buy Deborah's book from Blue Hill Books, even if you're not in our area. If you love this area and you want to support the local bookstore, Samantha and Matt will ship it to you. So
Yeah.
check
Yes,
that out
please
there if you don't
do.
already have a copy.
Yes, please do. Thank you. And
And
Hannah,
we've got more online events coming up at the library. You can look at our calendar. Next week we have on Thursday night H. Richard Dietrich III to talk about his book In Pursuit of History. It's going to be, I think, really interesting, all about the sort of colonial history and American fine and decorative arts that he and the institution he works with have been collecting over the years. And there's going to be lots of great pictures. So if that sounds like something of interest, you can sign up online to get the link for it or give us a call. And there's more stuff coming up as the fall goes on. So stay tuned to the library.
and thank you so much. Thank you very much.
What I would love is to finish off tonight. I'm going to unmute everybody, and it's going to be cacophonous and crazy, but it's going to be a way that everyone can just applaud and say thank you and shout out and say thanks to Deborah. So we'll all get to feel everybody's joy. So you can feel free to unmute yourselves now.
Okay. Thank you, Deborah.
Bravo.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks, everybody.
You're so great.
Thanks. Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
night, everyone.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thanks so much, Hannah. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
To all of you. Thank